Yeah.
Okay, I'll start my discussion, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. So good evening, one and all. I'm Dr. Shiva Prasad, DMD resident, gastrointestinal surgery department of from Astromibs, Calicut. So what I'll be presenting today is a right colon malignancy in Lynch syndrome, a difficult course. So I bring you greetings from Astromibs, Calicut Hospital and from the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology. So the case is that of Mr. ABC, a 54-year-old male from Kozhikode. He is an ex-serviceman. His initial presentation was in September 2019. So he presented with anemia with a HB of 6.5 on regular health checkup. His previous regular health checkup was done 2 years back and was within normal limits. He is a known diabetic on insulin and OHS and it's well controlled. There is no history of any prior surgeries. So a family history is significant with 2 siblings, mother and multiple members on the maternal side having documented of colonic carcinoma. So he is a third child of a non-consanguineous marriage. His age at presentation is 52. So he was initially evaluated elsewhere. The upper GI endoscopy was normal. The colonoscopy showed the presence of an ulceroproliferative growth at the hepatic flexure, with the rest of the colon being normal. So the biopsy report showed a moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. 2 units of PRBC was transfused and was referred to our center for further management. On examination, he is a person with a performance score of ECOG 0, conscious, oriented, hemodynamically stable, no pallor icterus cyanosis, clubbing, generalized lymphadenopathy, or pedal edema. His abdominal examination was completely unremarkable. Big inspection, palpation, percussion, and auscultation findings were all within the normal limits. So his laboratory investigation showed a hemoglobin of 9.4. The total leukocyte count, the platelet count, the electrolytes, the creatinine, and the LFT was within normal limits. So with these basic investigations, we proceeded further. His serum CEA levels was 57.62. A CECT abdomen and pelvis along with the CT thorax was done. So I'm just going to play the video of the CT. So it shows the presence of a ulceroproliferative lesion at the hepatic flexure of the colon. With the rest of the intra-abdomen being normal. So there were multiple more than 4 nodes of short axis diameter 5 to 6 mm noted along the ileocolic vessels. The liver was normal with no focal lesions. There was no ascites. So CT thorax was unremarkable. So we proceeded with a laparoscopic extended right hemicolectomy. The intraoperative findings, there were inflammatory adhesions to the liver and adjacent parietus. There was a 5 cross 5 centimeter growth with both an exophytic as well as luminal component in the distal ascending colon, extending to the hepatic flexure. There were clinically enlarged lymph nodes. There was no macroscopic extracolonic infiltration. The rest of them looked normal. So his post-op period was uneventful. The drain output was serious. He got discharged on post-operative day 5. So the histopathology report was, it's a mucinous adenocarcinoma with moderate degree of differentiation. All the resected margins were free of tumor. There was no lymphovascular invasion, no perineural invasion. There were around 27 lymph nodes which are recruited, and all were showing just reactive changes. So the pathological staging was T3N0. The IHC study showed MSI instability. So MLH1 and MSH2 were normally expressed, whereas MSH2 and MSH6 were not expressed. So we went to the multidisciplinary team with the following key points. What we are dealing with is a stage of T2, T3, N0, M0, stage 2 colonic carcinoma. There were no high-risk features. The MSI was high. There was a strong family history of cancer, suspected Lynch syndrome. So the consensus at this point was to negligible benefit of chemotherapy. So the plan was to just follow up. So the first follow-up was after 1 month. The patient is doing well. There are no symptoms. Clinical examination is unremarkable. All the routine blood investigations within normal limits. So the plan was to follow up after 2 months with serum CA levels, get a CECT abdomen and CT thorax at 6 months post-surgery, follow-up colonoscopy at 1 month post-surgery. So the follow-up to, as per the plan, was on December 2019, 3 months post-surgery. His clinical features are again unremarkable. The blood investigations are within normal limits. The CEA pre-op CA57 had dropped down to 4.8. So we stick with the previous plan, which we had already formulated: CT thorax after 6 months and colonoscopy after 1 year. So meanwhile, we got a genetic study, given that the MSI was high. It showed the presence of a heterogeneous pathogenic variant was detected, which causes deletion of exon 1 to 7 of MSH2 gene. So a diagnosis of Lynch syndrome was confirmed with this genetic study. So 5 months post-surgery, he presented with history of abdominal discomfort. There were no other symptoms. Clinical examination was normal. Routine blood investigations was within normal limits. And the CEA, which had come down to 4.8, had gone up to 38.3 again. So we took a CECT abdomen and pelvis. It showed poorly enhanced hypodense lesion in over the liver surface, segment 6 area. There was another poorly enhancing lesion near the anastomotic site. There were minimally enhancing lesions supporting the ileal loops near the anastomotic site on the mesenteric side. And there was one more lesion closely aborting the right ureter. So these are the CT images, the same. One near the ileal loop and one near the subcapsular location. So CT thorax showed tiny nodules measuring 2.2 millimeter in apical segment and one more in 3.2 in posterior segment. No mediastinal lymphnopathy, no effusion. So we went ahead with a PET CT. So PET CT confirmed the presence of at least 4 lesions, largest measuring 21 cross 30 in the right side upper abdomen, suggestive of recurrence or metastatic deposit. There was no evidence of any active lesions elsewhere. So disease progression. So we went back to the blackboard. What we were dealing with is the stage 2 colonic carcinoma, MSI high, a proven diagnosis of Lynch syndrome with a local regional recurrence. The PCI index at this stage was 6. So the consensus of the group was to go ahead with the surgery followed by an adjuvant chemotherapy. So given the closeness of the lesion to the right ureter, we had to do an intraoperative right ureter stenting. And then we proceeded ahead with ileocolic segmental resection, the local peritoneal metastasectomy, omentectomy. So this was 6 months post the primary surgery. So the intraoperative findings were the previous anastomotic line looked healthy. There were tumor deposits in the ileal and the colonic mesentery, and multiple peritoneal deposits were present in the right hepatic, perihepatic, right perinephric, periureteric, and periduodenal regions. So post-surgery, the recovery was completely uneventful, got discharged on POD6. So the histopathology report showed recurrent mucinous adenocarcinoma, moderate degree of differentiation. All the margins were clear except the duodenal margin, which was close to the tumor within 1 millimeter clearance. No lymphovascular invasion, no perineural invasion, 17 lymph nodes taken off and showed only reactive changes. There was an additional finding of mixed hyperplastic adenomatous polyp with focal high-grade dysplasia in the resected colon. So following up, the CEA levels had dropped down to 5.17 again. So as per the plan we had formulated, adjuvant chemotherapy, KPOX regime was given for 6 months. So he tolerated 3 cycles well. He had the thrombocytopenia and the 4th cycle had to be put on hold. He had poor tolerance to the KPOX regime, so shifted to capecitabine monotherapy. So now 10 months post-surgery in July 2020, he gets admitted again with tiredness. By this time, he has completed 4 cycles of chemotherapy. Blood investigations showed only anemia, 2 units of transfusion done. Stool occult blood was positive. So we went ahead with upper GI and a lower GI endoscopy. Upper GI endoscopy showed grade A esophagitis. Lower GI endoscopy showed the presence of an anastomotic ulcer. We took a biopsy of this lesion and it showed only inflammation, no evidence of any recurrence. So we went with, it's October 2020, by this time 8 cycles of chemotherapy had completed. He's comfortable, tolerating well, unremarkable physical examination findings. CA had dropped down to 5.71. End of treatment scan was within normal limits. So after completing this therapy, he was completely asymptomatic for around 4 months period. And then on in February 2021, around 15 months post the primary surgery, he is admitting again with postprandial heaviness. Clinical examination is normal, routine blood tests are normal, but the CEA had gone up to 44.6 again. So the PET-CT again showed mild metabolically active possible residual or recurrent lesions in the subhepatic region, one anterior to right kidney, posterior to right kidney, as well as near to the lower IVC. The PCI score is 11. So we went back to the MDT team. The option of CRS plus HIPEC versus an immunotherapy was discussed, and the consensus was to proceed with the cytoreductive surgery plus the HIPEC. So right degestenting, peritoneal metastasectomy, cholecystectomy plus the HIPEC surgery was done on March 2021. Intraoperative findings showed mucinous deposits abutting the capsule of body and the neck of the pancreas, gallbladder, inferior surface of liver, right ureter, and the rectovesical pouch. There also was small mucinous deposits on the peritoneal surface of the right parietal wall, but the small bowel and large bowel mesentery look free of any tumor deposit. So a complete peritoneal metastasectomy, peritonectomy was done, and the HIPEC therapy was given according to the Sugar-Baker regimen. So post-op period again was completely uneventful. He got discharged on POD 7. Stent was removed on 7 April. But again, he back again after 17 months with a severe backache. Clinical examination again unremarkable. This time CA had gone up to 130. So we repeated the PET scan again. There were multiple peritoneal deposits in the abdomen and the pelvic wall this time. There was multiple enlarged lymph nodes also. So what we're dealing with is a stage 4 disease now. The consensus was it's a progressive disease. The best that we could do to him is an immunotherapy. So he was started on injection pembrolizumab. 3 cycles of pembrolizumab are completed by 21st of the previous month, and is currently doing well and is symptomatically free now. So his CA levels has come down to again 19.18 nanogram per ml. So the summary of the case, a case of right hepatic flexure growth, what initial laparoscopic extended right hemicolectomy done, recurrence after the first 5 months, resection of the lesions with an adjuvant chemotherapy done, second recurrence 4 months post this treatment, cytoreductive surgery plus HIPEC done, third recurrence 1 year post the HIPEC treatment, and is currently on immunotherapy. So this was a case that that I wanted to present. Now some discussion features just on the Lynch syndrome. It's basically most common cause of inherited colorectal cancer, accounts for 3% of the cases with newly diagnosed colorectal cancers, autosomal dominant inheritance, basically due to germline mutations in those 4 mismatched repair genes, MLH1, MSH2, MSH6, and PMS2. Now, what I want to highlight in my discussion is colorectal cancer in Lynch syndrome. Is it different from any sporadic cases? The second question is adjuvant chemotherapy for a stage 2 colorectal cancer. High risk features, is strong family history one of them? The third point I want to discuss is the role of HIPEC in colorectal cancer peritoneal metastasis. So the first question, the colorectal cancers in a Lynch syndrome is basically predominantly on the right sided. The adenomas that they tend to arise from are predominantly larger, they are flatter lesions, they are more proximally located, they are more likely to have high-grade dysplasia and or villus histology. There is more rapid progression of adenoma carcinoma sequence, 35 months in Lynch syndrome compared to 10 to 15 years in sporadic cases. Now the tumor characteristics, there is MSI high tumors, loss of expression of MMR proteins are there. The histology tends to be mucinous, signet ring cell or medullary type. They are basically poorly differentiated tumors. They have Crohn's-like lymphoid reaction. So how does all this interpret in the clinical management of this patient? So basically MSH high tumors respond poorly to chemotherapy, but they have a good response to immunotherapy. Although all these poor prognostic factors look evident, the 10-year overall survival is again 88% for a colonic cancer and 70% for a rectal cancer. So the second thing is adjuvant treatment for a stage 2 colorectal cancer. The high risk features is strong family history, one of them. So NCCN guidelines tells about all these are the high risk features for which a chemotherapy is indicated. A poorly differentiated or an undifferentiated histology, perineural invasion, lymphovascular invasion, less than 2 lymph nodes that are examined, presence of bowel obstruction or a localized perforation at the presentation, a close intermediate or a positive margins. But a family history is not considered in any of these indications as a high-risk feature. So this is the latest NCCN guidelines, which tells about a T3 or a T4 lesion with no lymph node or no metastasis and an MSH-high lesion. What it suggests is just an observation treatment, and that's what we did in that patient. So there are subtle differences between what the different organizations on what they suggest the chemotherapy regimens to be. NCCN recommends 2A with no high-risk features observation, while it separates 2A with high risk, 2B and 2C stages, whereas the ASCO and ESMO guidelines stage 2 disease without or with high-risk features, and those are considered for adjuvant therapy. So now all these chemotherapy regimens is based on several trials. I'll be just highlighting few of them on which all these chemotherapy regimens are based upon. The first is the NSABP trial, a series of trials. Basically, the conclusion of this trial was the adjuvant chemotherapy decreases the risk of death and improved cure, regardless of the presence or absence of high-risk features. So it basically recommends giving chemotherapy to a stage 2 colorectal cancer patients. So the second trial is the QUASAR trial, quick and simple and reliable trial. Compared the same thing, chemotherapy with 5FU based therapy with a surgery alone. So what they found out is a statistically significant decreased risk of dying and of recurrence. And the benefit of chemotherapy was there in first 2 years. So QUASAR trial basically recommends chemotherapy for a stage 2 cancer. Now, all these were just single trials. What the IMPACT B2 trial is a multicentric trial, basically combines 5 trials, and what it showed is there is no significant difference in event-free survival, and the 5-year overall survival is nearly the same. And Gill et al. Combined IMPACT B2 analysis with 2 other studies, which he also showed that there is no significant difference with an adjuvant chemotherapy for a stage 2 colorectal cancer. So one more, this is one of the study that taken into consideration the MSH high behavior of the tumor. They showed that overall survival was significantly better in MSH high tumor who did not receive any adjuvant chemotherapy. So what the ultimate conclusion is, it's a balance. On one side is the patient's preoperative score, performance score, the tumor and the tumor characteristics, while on the other side is the chemotherapy regimes and the side effects. Each chemotherapy regimen has to be tailored to the patient, considering all these factors. And then the need for adjuvant chemotherapy has to be decided. So the third question, the role of HIPEC in colorectal cancer, peritoneal metastasis. So whom do we choose HIPEC for? So it's basically based on 2 factors. One is the ability to achieve a complete resection of the tumor. So this complete resection can be identified preoperatively by using a peritoneal carcinomatosis index, can be judged intraoperatively by the completion of cytoreduction score. So if an adequate complete resection can be achieved, and if the residual tumor is less than 2 or 2.5 mm, then we can choose HIPEC for this patient. And the second and the other major factors is a patient fitness for the surgery. So there are no exact guidelines of whom to be given the HIPEC therapy or not. What there are evidences actually. So I'll be just taking through some 4 major trials that have been done in the past, which recommends, some of which recommend and some of which don't recommend HIPEC therapy. So Veerwal et al. Found out that a cytoreductive surgery following by HIPEC improves survival in patients with a peritoneal carcinomatosis. He also showed that involvement of 6 or more regions in abdominal cavity has still grave prognosis. So the second trial I want to quote is the done by Elias et al. So colorectal cancer of peritoneal metastasis followed by early postoperative chemotherapy plus systemic versus systemic chemotherapy alone. What he showed is that the early postoperative intraperitoneal chemotherapy did not show any demonstrate survival advantage. So the third trial that I'm quoting is the Cashin et al. CRS plus HIPEC may be superior to systemic oxaliplatin based regimes based with resectable isolated peritoneal metastasis. So what we have also to note is the year all these trials are quoted. The first trial was in the year 2013, and then there is a transition of recommendations as we progress to 2016.
My prayer.
Hello, sir. Hello. The final trial that I want to quote is that was done in 2021, the PRODIS-7 trial. So what it recommends is CRM cytoreductive surgeries alone should be the cornerstone of therapeutic strategies with curative intent for peritoneal metastasis, and does not highly recommend the HIPEC treatment along with it. So the baseline, considering all these trials into account, so the use of HIPEC after the cytoreductive surgeries should not be considered standard at present, and should only be pursued in centers with demonstrated expertise, preferably in the clinical trial. So what I want to convey from my presentation is Lynch syndrome, a bad looking tumor, although has a good looking prognosis. The adjuvant chemotherapy for a stage 2 colorectal cancer is definitely should be given with high risk features, but colorectal cancer as a part of Lynch syndrome is still not a high risk feature. So cytoreductive surgeries for a peritoneal disease is a definite yes, but a cytoreductive surgery combined with HIPEC is still not the standard of care. So thank you for the.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva Prasad, for this excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. I had a few doubts regarding your HIPEC. Are you this? Is this the first time you are doing, or is it a trial or some experimental treatment going on in your institution?
We have done several cases of HIPEC in the past, sir. I don't have the exact data.
No, I'm
how
not
many cases
looking for data actually. Okay. Whether the results, the present result does not look promising, yes, and even the latest 40G trial also does not support the use of HIPEC. So, yes, do you have better results that had any better result that in the past?
Madhu, can I answer?
Yeah.
With regard to HIPEC, we have started using it somewhere around 6 or 7 years back. I don't remember exact years, but they were mainly for the pseudomyxoma peritoneal disease.
Yeah.
And we have some good results also. There also, it depends upon the pathology, whether it is more towards a benign or a hybrid type. And whenever it extends to malignancy, we also had recurrence.
Yeah. Okay.
So for the colorectal malignancy, this is for the first time we are doing. Our first case for the colorectal cancer with adenocarcinoma undergoing a HIPEC.
Yeah.
We are just trying to extrapolate the results we thought that we'll get for the pseudomyxoma. But definitely the literature also is now going back on HIPEC.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sajesh. And the way it looks like peritoneal carcinomatosis looks like a house set on fire. So how to extinguish it's a big problem. And the results that we see, mostly the Sugar-Baker's regimen, all come from the same place. The Dutch trial one is going on now. The French trial that you have reported, that shows not very good results. So, and the cytoreductive surgery is supposed to be the better one, and that too for a localized peritoneal metastasis, I believe.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. There are some questions on the chat box. Can you see it?
Sir, I think I'll just have to exit this presentation and then I can enter that. Can I do that?
Okay, then, yeah. Should I read them? Dr. Ramesh Rajan is asking, I think there is evidence that checkpoint inhibitors are useful for MSI high disease at the time of index surgery. Any comment on? And he's also asking, would biologicals have made a difference at the time of detection of early recurrence? Would biologicals have made a difference at the time of detection of the first recurrence? I mean, the first. Dr. Ramesh is asking.
Okay, sir. Given that all the disease was localized to one quadrant, predominantly the right hypochondrium and those regions and all looked resectable, we had to go ahead with the surgery first rather than try on the biologicals and the immunotherapy. So we could achieve a clear margin. We could resect off all the disease intraoperatively actually. So immunotherapy was second in the list, sir, actually.
No, what I meant is, Shiva Prasad, what I meant is biologicals after resection in addition as an adjunct to resection, not biological.
Okay.
Dr. Ramesh, we had a discussion in the multidisciplinary and all, and then only we had proceed that since it's a colorectal
But
malignancy.
Sajesh, no offense meant, but normally the oncologists are generally more aggressive, correct?
Yeah, there were, but here they suggested surgery. I don't know. They wanted us to do the surgery and get rid of the disease.
Okay, correct.
Yeah.
But in addition to the surgery, I mean, many oncologists would go for aggressive chemo as well. I would like to know the opinion of Madhu as well. Madhu is here, I think, in the.
Yeah, I'm here, sir. Can I speak, sir?
Yeah.
Regard, can I ask one question first, sir?
Yeah, you can ask.
Sir, if we had known that the patient is a Lynch syndrome patient initially itself, would the extent of surgery had been different? Would you do a total colectomy in a patient who has a strong family history as per the history that has been presented and the MSI high patient? Would there have been a difference in the extent of initial surgery? Retrospectively, there would not have been because the patient recurred in the peritoneum, but if that was is there a role for extended surgery in Lynch syndrome? That's my question, sir.
Subtotal colectomy has to be considered if a preoperative diagnosis of, Lynch is in place. A subtotal colectomy has to be considered in that scenario rather than a segmental resection.
Yeah, this patient had. Madhu is right.
I think that's the point I wanted to. In this patient, I think in a patient who is going to recur in a short span of time, peritoneal disease, it would not have made much difference. But otherwise, if you have a preoperative diagnosis of a Lynch syndrome based on a family history which has been corroborated by MSI testing, which shows it to be high, I think it would have been better if you go for a total colectomy because you reduce the number of metachronous colon primaries and revision surgeries. That's one thing. Second thing, going to Ramesh Rajan's question on biologicals, I think from a limited knowledge, this is a chemo-naive patient because it was a stage 2 colon cancer. And because there are no risk factors, they did not give any chemotherapy after the initial surgery because of no negative T3 tumor. You wouldn't give chemotherapy even if they're high risk. So in a chemo-naive patient, when they recur, we tend to give them initial chemotherapy alone without adding in biologicals. So we reserve the biological for a second recurrence or a liver metastasis, something like that. So in this patient who
but having said that, but isn't the recurrence a little too early? I mean, it is a little too early. So I agree.
Yes.
You were a chemo-naive patient, but
retrospectively, when you look at the disease-free interval that the patient has got after each surgery, it is going on decreasing. So the biology is bad. So even if you had added a biological initially itself, I don't think the outcome would have been different.
Yeah.
And as far as the HIPEC is concerned, rightly mentioned, the PRODIGY 7 trial has shown that adding on HIPEC doesn't add on to the survival or the oncological benefits. It is the extent of cytoreductive surgery that you attain, or the R0 resection, or the CC0 that matters. So I think cytoreductive surgery should be encouraged even in colorectal peritoneal metastasis. But the HIPEC thing, I think we need more data or we need more evidence. That's my take on those two things, sir.
Yeah. Madhu, you said one point which you said right. Actually, really they didn't know about the MSI status, but the patient had a definite history, family history, suggestive of Lynch syndrome. So what he said is right. I mean, I think we should. There was a role for subtotal colectomy in the first place. Probably there was a role for subtotal colectomy in the first place. The MSI testing was done
with the tumor tissue.
Resected specimen. On the resected specimen.
Yes.
Dr. Shivaprasad, could you have done genetic testing prior to the surgery, not in the tumor? Because this patient, you had a good family tree which showed a lot of tumors in the siblings. Lynch was very much possible. HNPCC was possible. So could you have done testing before?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Given that the family history was positive.
That's what Dr. Madhu also was probably asked.
Okay.
So if I can, because if you look at the Bethesda guidelines, this patient particularly falls into the Bethesda criteria. So if the patient falls in the Bethesda criteria, you should be sending the initial biopsy itself for genetic testing if you have the facilities for that. So this patient typically falls into the Bethesda guidelines. So if possible, we could have sent that and we could have done that.
But usually this genetic testing and all will take time, especially in our center. It's taking time of 1 month. And here the patient has presented with anemia. and requiring blood transfusions.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, we had not
And,
thought about it also at the initial setting. I'm not telling as an excuse that we are not that, but that is the usual scenario that we have. The genetic testing will all take time in our setup.
Yeah. So, Madhu, even in the absence of genetic testing with the history,
Yes, sir.
clear-cut probably Lynch. So, subtotal colectomy.
No,
But
Sajesh,
in
no
this
offense,
particular
offense
patient-
meant, just for the theoretical discussion of that.
Yeah.
Not go
So, but in this particular patient,
always.
rather than a metachronous disease or a fresh disease, the patient has recurred in the peritoneum as well.
Ramesh sir, you need not go for the genetic testing always. You can go for the IHC of the tumor, like you can test for MLH, PSM. So it is a very just like any other IHC. So that
MLH.
you can know whether MLH, MS2, those four IHC proteins you can pick up in your IHC test, and if you can probably get that done, you need not always go for a genetic testing, because as Sajesh said, genetic testing usually you get it after a particular time plan.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
IHC of the tumor specimen is an easily doable thing. Probably we can do that if available facilities are available for that.
But agreed, I agree completely. But
can I make a doubt?
Prakash, just a minute. This patient has mainly recurred elsewhere as well, rather than the issue of subtotal colectomy.
That's what
as
I
well.
said. In this patient, it will not have made any difference because the patient's interval has been, so doing a total colectomy would have been a bit overdoing because the patient is recurring in the peritoneum. So your extended surgery would not have benefited this. I'm talking just in a hypothetical situation when you have a next time a patient with these things. If you have facilities, you can send for IHC, and based on that, you can decide the extent of surgery. That was.
Yeah.
Dr. Prakash?
Yeah, I was about to make that point. The subtotal colectomy comes in when there is multiple polyps apart from primary tumor. Otherwise, if the patient has only a right-sided colon cancer, I think hemicolectomy should be sufficient. Subtotal colectomy, I don't think will prevent any future recurrence. If there is multiple polyps, then only there is also subtotal colectomy.
And Dr. Sajesh, do you get genetic testing as most of the sites, most of the places, labs that they do it as a panel? And do you get colorectal alone? Whenever I ask for some of the centers, they do almost, they make a battery of tests, not only colorectal, everything together. So
here, what all has been done, I think Shiva will be more will be able to answer. I think what were there in the panel.
And it takes long time. As you said, it takes very long time.
Sir, around 14 genes were tested, sir, actually. In this panel, around 14 genes were tested related to all this colorectal malignancies and all. So out of which the MSS2 turned out to be positive, mutated, I mean.
And Shiv Prasad, as your title, it's a difficult course, right colon malignancy in Lynch syndrome, but this seems to be a tumor biology rather than Lynch syndrome operating, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's not Lynch syndrome as such. This tumor biology seems to be bad. So both are not connected, probably.
Okay.
That's why you had a bad post-operative course.
All right, sir. Okay.
Madhu, we also want to know anybody is favoring the HIPEC in peritoneal carcinomatosis due to colorectal malignancies, especially the RCC, the main oncology centers.
Yeah.
And what are their indications? When they will not do? Could somebody highlight? Madhu, is there?
Dr. Madhu?
Yeah, sir, I'm here. Sajesh, as you rightly said, in colorectal cancers, the numbers we have done is very less because the PCI is the most important thing. It's a surrogate marker of your ability to get a CC0. So the PCI is high in a colorectal cancer, a chance of getting a CC0 is very low. So if PCI is something around, if you look at the Prodigy trial, they have recruited patients with PCI of about 5, 6 or less than 10. The mean PCI was around 5 or 6. So that is the most important. If you have low PCI colorectal cancer, you may recruit those patients for peritonectomy. because there's a higher chance of getting a complete cytoreduction. So I would say 10 would be 10 or 11 would be the highest PCI which you would recruit. But the main changes when you look into mucinous neoplasms of the appendix or mucinous neoplasms like pseudomyxoma peritoniae, etc. There you have to go for an extended cytoreduction. You don't need to look at your PCI index up to 20, 25. You may be able to attain a complete cytoreduction depending upon the number of deposits on the small bowel mesentery. That is a limiting step. The disease in the small bowel mesentery and the disease in the porta are the two limiting steps. The remaining all things, probably you may be able to do an extended cytoreductive surgery like diaphragmatic stripping, right hemicolectomy, distal gastrectomy, peritoneal, pelvic peritonectomy, hysterectomy, salpingophorectomy, bladder peritonectomy, all those things. But in colorectal cancers, you need to choose your patients very well. Probably I would say 10 would be the upper limit. So if you like to ask the number of patients we are done in RCC, I would say maybe around 2 or 3 colorectal cancer. But the other thing, gynae, they do pretty lot of HIPEX and peritonectomy procedures. But in colorectal cancers, I would say even our experience maybe around 2 or 3 or 4 patients. That's all. Pseudomyxoma peritoniae, mucinous neoplasm appendix, we have bigger numbers.
Oh, thank you, Madhu.
Any further questions?
So what do we do with our next patient who is a T2 N0 disease or T3 N0 disease?
Yeah.
So anybody considering family history also as a high risk factor for chemotherapy in a stage 2 disease? Any of the centers considering?
No, Sajesh. I don't think family history by itself is a indication for giving adjuvant chemotherapy in a T2 N0. So as Ramesh sir was asking what to do in the next patient, it's T2 N0, you still would go for, or T3 N0, you still would keep on follow based on your. But I think the histology, the CT showed something more extensive tumor. That's something very commonly we see. When we operate the patient, we think it's a T4 lesion or it has breached the peritoneum, infiltration to extra peritoneal structures. But when we get the final HPR report, it ends up to be T3. Probably desmoplasia may be the one producing the. Even in this patient, it's really large and extensive.
Can I ask you, has this, sir?
Yeah, please ask.
Has this patient progressed on the pembrolizumab, that the checkpoint inhibitor? I think you have started the patient on.
Yes, sir. So after starting the patient, he has completed 3 cycles of this immunotherapy, and right now the CEA levels are decreasing, and the patient is getting symptomatically better. So we are to repeat a PET scan, and we have to check the progress of the disease as such. Currently, symptomatically, he is better with all this immunotherapy actually.
I think the current NCCN recommends for metastatic colorectal cancer who are MSI high, for metastatic colorectal cancer who are MSI high, these checkpoint inhibitors are considered not adjuvant exactly, but are therapy. Pembrolizumab, that is checkpoint inhibitor.
And Shiv Prasad,
Yes, sir.
have you traced the relatives and given the genetic the counseling for them? Because it's
Yes,
very
sir.
difficult nowadays in our setup to take even the genetic testing. Very often it is distressing to the family. Most of them will not agree even to say it is a genetic cancer. When you have, at least I have one family which refuses to go for any sort of such discussions at all. So it's very difficult. So
Yes, sir.
have you done that, or will
Yes,
you
sir.
be
Family
able
counsel.
to do that? May or may not be done. I'm not asking you, but
Okay.
is
Well,
it
we have.
Sometimes there are situations where we are not able to do that, just to give the genetic counseling, because most of them females, especially married, their parents will not allow us to even tell that this has got a genetic all.
Yes, sir.
It's very
So we
difficult,
have.
but
Yeah.
you are supposed to give genetic counseling for the family. Otherwise, there's
Yes,
no use of doing a hereditary or the genetic testing.
Exactly, sir.
Some more questions in chat box is there.
Yeah. Dr. Prasad,
Yes, sir.
You can ask the question. It is why not you ask, is there
Sir,
that
I'll just
since-
exit this presentation, sir. I'll just exit this presentation.
yeah, you can exit. There are some questions in the chat box. Dr. Prasad.
Okay, sir. I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
I think you can stop share.
Yes, sir. Okay, fine. Okay.
Dr. Prasad is asking, there is recurrence again, what would be your plan of action?
Actually, if there is a recurrence again, what will you already you have
Sir, I was not able to hear the question, sir.
If there is recurrence again, what would be your plan of action? Dr. Prasad is asking.
Complete the patient on immunotherapy and give best palliative care. We are running out of options for,
Or CAMS, Prasad, CAMS is an option.
Okay.
Prasad, what about your Kerala registry? Do you have a record of hereditary cases or in our record?
We have hereditary cases also being reported, but the numbers are really less actually.
Can you make a series? If it is a small one also, it is okay because it's not that common. So you can just highlight, make it a separate series. Even if numbers are less, it doesn't matter because we may not have enough studies from our part of the country regarding hereditary. NPCC or whatever. And you can even go back to the data. You can ask them for the genetic data if it is not there, at least where which institutions are operating so that you can have.
I think only 3%, 3 to 5% of hereditary cases were there in our registry data. Of the now of the 1,000 cases, now it is 1,700 cases around. So almost the percentage is around 3 to 5%. That we'll definitely look into it. We can segregate the hereditary cases and then evaluate.
You can just go to the chat box. Are you seeing the chat box, Shiv Prasad?
yes, sir.
I think some of them you already as already. Why not pre-op PET CT done at first surgery? That also by Prasad only.
Oh, NCCN doesn't recommend a routine PET CT to be done as a part of evaluation protocol. So what we have done is
Okay.
we have done a CT abdomen and a CT thorax as a part of the metastatic workup, and that showed only lesions in the abdomen limited to the site of lesion, nothing elsewhere. There was no suspicion to get a PET CT, so we did not take any PET CT initially.
And any difference in detection of peritoneal carcinomatosis at lab versus open? Ananda Kumar sir is asking.
Routine diagnostic laparoscopy is not indicated for a colorectal malignancy as such. Given the preoperative evaluation did not show any of these signs of any other suspicious lesions, we did not go ahead with the diagnostic lab as such.
When you look at the CT scan, you can see that there is a very large bulky tumor.
Yes, sir.
And in spite of this, you have got a result of T3 lesion.
Yes, sir. There was more of an okay.
And during the laparoscopy also, the description was it was adherent to the adjacent tissues. That's what.
Yes, sir.
So,
yes. So there, okay. There were basically inflammatory adhesions were present. There were flimsy adhesions, easily separable adhesions. Did not look like any of the extracolonic invasion or anything like that. So it was more. It had a both intraluminal as well as an extraluminal component. So maybe that is causing the tumor to appear bulky as such, but the pathological staging is still T3 N0 M0.
No, is it possible that the pathologist has missed the area where the tumor has perforated into the T4 region? That is a possibility because it has got the peritoneal recurrence very soon.
explanation.
At the end of the day, we all have to agree whatever the pathologist say. You can have a second opinion. That's all.
No, the thing probably is that they wouldn't have taken the slices exactly at the area where maybe the macroscopic appearance may be deceptive.
I think it's a very common experience. When we think it is T4, it comes as T3.
So surgeon is the first person who sees the specimen. So if there is any suspicion, surgeon has to mark and give. Otherwise, the pathologist also will not be able to identify. So basically, the first inspection and marking should be by the surgeon. And if there is any suspicion of tumor penetrating outside, if you want to give a proper treatment, you have to mark the site to the pathologist and give the specimen. Otherwise, they also will not be able to identify it.
Yeah, that is exactly the question I wanted to ask. How was the surgeon feeling with this bulky tumor immediately after surgery, in spite of being a T3 tumor?
Actually, Naushif has operated, but I will tell you the findings were all most suggestive of an inflammatory lesion only. I mean, inflammatory adhesions only.
Actually, the aim of this presentation was to look at all these things, like where did we go wrong, or should we have altered the course?
Yeah, agree completely with you. I was just trying to see why this T3 tumor has recurred so much in spite of being a stage 2 disease.
Yes. So
That is exact.
So what we want to discuss here is like not discuss, but the highlight here is like so the intraoperative findings, like or radiological findings, being a bulky tumor. So all these things should they be considered when we think for adjuvant therapy or not? That's one of the things. And could the course be altered if we would have given the adjuvant therapy at the earliest?
That was exactly was my doubt also, because whether we missed the T4 lesion in spite of and wrongly reported as T3. That's the reason, because it was not the recurrence is in the peritoneum and the external area, and there is no lymphovascular and perineural spread, and there is no lymph spread in any lymph nodes also. So there is a possibility that there is maybe a tumor perforation which has caused inflammation, which we would have missed, or the pathologist have missed.
But intraoperatively, as Sajid told, it was all flimsy adhesions. There was no evidence of any perforation.
Okay.
We would have thought the other way around.
Okay.
Next is there was some discussion on the adjuvant therapy and biologicals, but always what we have to take in mind is like biologicals are never a substitute for adjuvant therapy. So adjuvant therapy should be considered first.
And a bulky tumor, does it qualify for adjuvant therapy in any of these? Doesn't,
No,
even though you feel it, doesn't feel for.
No, it doesn't qualify. I was thinking that whether
we always think we ask them to give it,
retrospectively we can think all these things.
Yeah.
But
and I doubt whether systemic chemotherapy will prevent such peritoneal recurrences.
yeah, that was the only doubt, whether the chemotherapy at the index surgery would have prevented the recurrence. That is the only doubt which has been.
But for peritoneal recurrences, would it have prevented? That's also a question. Okay. Any further questions?
Madhavan, can I ask one question to Shiv Prasad?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes,
sir. Shiv Prasad, suppose this patient is a female gender.
Okay.
How would you change your line of management? Would you consider evaluation of endometrium or breast, or could you consider a hysterectomy?
Yes, sir. I've been given a female patient. The most common extraintestinal manifestation of a Lynch syndrome is an endometrial CA, actually. So it's very essential we screen the endometrium, and given if she has completed family, a consideration for TAH plus BSC has to be considered. So
Considered even in the absence of endometrial findings?
yes, sir. If she has completed her family, it's hello. If she has
Even-
completed,
Yeah.
yes, sir. If the female belongs to age group where she has completed her family, a prophylactic TH plus B also is always it's always considered.
If the female if the female has completed the family at 30 years of age,
Pidambaran, can I come in?
Askari.
Am I audible? Pidambaran, can I come in and make a small comment?
yes.
Regarding Ramachandran's question, I don't think prophylactic surgery is indicated in Lynch syndrome at all. Maybe prophylactic surgery for colon or prophylactic surgery for endometrium. But when you take up a patient for a curative surgery for a colonic surgery in a Lynch patient, you would do prophylactic hysterectomy and bilateral superior if the patient has completed family. That is the role of prophylactic surgery in Lynch syndrome. To be clear, that is if you have a patient with a colon cancer with Lynch syndrome, and you're taking the patient for a primary surgery for a colonic cancer, then you would do a hysterectomy and bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy if the patient has completed family history. Otherwise, there is no role for a prophylactic colectomy or a prophylactic hysterectomy in an otherwise asymptomatic patient just because she is a Lynch syndrome patient. That's my take on that. If I am wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that was the same thing what Ramachandran was asking, Shiva Prasad. In this particular patient with a colonic malignancy, would you, if it's a female, what would you plan? I think Madhu, that is what I think he was asking. In this like type of patient with a colonic malignancy. Yeah.
So if she is a 53-year-old female presenting with these similar symptoms, then I would go ahead with a TH plus B also at the same setting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
I would like to have some more clarification because Prakash sir and Ramesh sir both made opposite statements. Not opposite actually. Lynch syndrome, the initial advice given by Ramesh sir was to go for a subtotal or a total colectomy. And Prakash sir has made a statement that if there is absence of polyps, we don't need to do for a subtotal colectomy. We can go for the resection and we can follow up with the colonoscopy. So what should be the take-home message?
I think both are correct, I think, because recently we had 4 or 5 cases over the last 2-3 months of Lynch syndrome. So I did a bit of extra reading into recently a presentation of department. So that's why I'm quoting from the literature. As Prakash sir said, there is no survival advantage by doing a total colectomy over a limited colectomy. But if you do a total colectomy, you reduce the number of times you need to go back into the same abdomen. That is only by doing a total colectomy. So you avoid the need to go back because as per the literature, the patient is likely to recur in 30 to 40% cases. So in about 30 to 40% cases during the same lifetime of the patient, you will have to go back. So as Prakash sir said, there is no survival advantage by doing a total colectomy over a limited colectomy. But if you do a total colectomy, you avoid the number of surgeries in that patient, that's all. So in that sense, both are correct, I think.
Yeah, there's an additional thing as well, Madhu, because actually, if you look at the profile of the patients as well, if it's a very educated patient, a compliant patient who is willing to come back regularly for review, for surveillance scopy, then of course, as Prakash said, definitely a limited colectomy or a right confining to that region is a good option, considering the fact that otherwise the patient would be having high frequency of stools and things like that, which affects the quality of life. Whereas if you have a poorly educated patient with a low compliant state, who may turn up with next time with the metastatic disease, with the metachronous tumor and metastatic disease, I think the subtotal colectomy would be such a good option for such of a patient.
Sir, subtotal versus total?
That is what I was saying.
No, subtotal versus total colectomy.
Oh, subtotal versus total. Okay.
In subtotal, you don't remove the sigmoid. In total, you remove the sigmoid and anastomosis at the level of the sacral promontory.
Promontory, yeah.
That would be the measurement, I think. Yeah, take the maximum amount of colon possible. At the same time, look at the quality of life. Don't go too much down into the pelvis due to the anastomosis. It will be iliarectal anastomosis, iliosigmoid anastomosis, something like that.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, why I made a comment like that is we have quite a few Lynch families, because those patients belong to the era when the MSI testing and the genetic testing was not available, and a few family members in 30s and 40s got operated, and because we educated the patients well, they all had classical hemicolectomies and limited surgeries. And on follow-up, regularly on strict follow-up, the polyps were regularly removed. In such scenario, if the patient is well educated, I don't think the re-surgeries are not that common. At least I can recall 2 or 3 families who are well educated and well followed. The issue is only when there is a patient who is non-compliant and not likely to present, then of course a subtotal colectomy is indicated, where you can easily surveil the patient. But even if you remove up to the sigmoid, if the patient has still disease polyps recurring in that, the patient is not compliant, I don't think the purpose is serving. So you should educate the patient about the surveillance, the importance of surveillance, and keep them under strict follow-up. That's what my take on this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely.
So no further questions coming up. Anything? Pitambada?
Nothing. You can go back to, I think.
Go back to the, shall we go back to the quiz?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me thank Dr. Shiva Prasad for this
Thank you, sir.
excellent presentation, and congratulate the entire team from Aster MIMS for the fantastic work they are doing, which we keep on getting updated on our ASGK side. Their congratulations to their excellent work that we see every other day. Sajeesh seems to be setting new standards. So congrats to all the Aster MIMS team. So let's go back to the quiz. Arjun?
Yes, thank you so much, Madhavan sir. Let me just play the CT again. Now, please come up with findings if you can.
Fatty liver.
Fatty liver, definitely. See, fissural widening, early fatty liver or early chronic liver disease. That is one finding in plain CT.
Pneumomediastinum.
No pneumomediastinum.
What is that point in the first slide, first picture? Just
pardon?
The first initial part.
You want to play it from the beginning?
Yeah, just show the first thing. So no, just see that pericardium. In the pericardium there is one. No, little bit above.
Here.
No, above. Come back again. Initial picture. Yeah, just see that period. No,
this one.
This one, yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, there is no air there. It's fat density only.
Okay. Somewhere here also.
Next finding on plain CT. ISBRD, perfect. See, from the plain CT, we are able to tell ISBRD. Then
CBD calculate.
Stone at the lower end.
Excellent. Multiple stones within the CBD. A large radio dense stone in the distalmost bile duct. What is this?
Gallbladder.
Again. Small contracted GB with air inside. Excellent. Small contracted GB with air inside. And no pneumobilia. That means there is no air in the CBD or the intrahepatic biliary radicals. So this is the large radiodense calculi, multiple stones in the the bile duct. So air only seen in the small conducted GB, not in the intrahepatic biliary radicals or common duct. This is the axial portal venous phase. The ISBRD has to be suspected on plain CT and confirmed on contrast CT. So that is confirmed ISBRD, and even there can be a small cholangiolytic abscess here. A small cholangiolytic abscess in the periphery. Fissural widening, early chronic liver disease or even fatty liver disease. This is a spectacle shape, the left hepatic duct, right hepatic duct, and the septum in between. And there is some enhancement of the bile duct. That means there is cholangitis or choledochitis. Sir?
Cholangitis.
Cholangitis. Again, the bile duct is large and the small contracted GB. No prior interventions. And you can see the bile duct, large bile duct with multiple stones. No prior interventions, but still small contracted GB. Suspect with air inside. Suspect.
Cholecystoenteric.
That's it. Cholecystoenteric or duodenal cholecystoid, whatever fistula. Anyway, we assume that from this there is a fistula. Now, can you just identify the type of fistula? Coronal sections from anterior to posterior. If you trace one particular bowel, it appears to be continuous with GB. This is duodenum. This is pancreas. This is second junction of the first and second part of duodenum. Just see the duodenum. This is a gallbladder, and the angulation of the stomach. Sorry, duodenum, which it makes with gallbladder. See, this shows that this is something like a continuous lumen. So this is spontaneous. That is why no large stones within the gallbladder. Almost all stones have passed into the GIT through the spontaneous fistula, and there is the natural cystic duct lying there. So it is very important to suspect cholecystoenteric fistula, as Ramesh Rajan sir was telling. Whenever there is a small contracted GB with long-standing symptoms, recurrent right upper quadrant symptoms, and a small contracted GB with air inside the gallbladder, and large CBD stones with the absence of similar density and size stones within the gallbladder. Then you trace with a good quality new generation CT scans. We should be able to predict this, if possible, prior to a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. There were many findings which were described by the esteemed participants. But Fahad, he's a surgical gastro resident, Dr. Fahad from Trivandrum Medical College. He has come up with the maximum findings, and he said cholecystocolidocal fistula. So at least he mentioned a spontaneous fistula. So by and large, he gets the first prize. And potentially there can be a devastating complication if we miss the duodenal fistula during surgery. There can be a duodenal fistula post-operatively that can produce problems. Thank you. Thank you so much. And back to Madhavan sir and Dr. Pitambaran.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adam. Now back to Pitambaran. Thank you, Dr. Sajeesh, Dr. Shiv Prasad, Dr. Adam, for the presentations. And thank you, Ramachandran and Pitambaran, for letting me moderate this session. Back to Pitambaran.
I think back to Dr. Ramachandran. I think can take over.
Yeah. So thank you all. We had one more very interesting session. This was our 10th one since lockdown last year. So I would like to thank Dr. Shiv Prasad and Dr. Sajeesh for their very interesting case. Very well presented, Shiv Prasad. It generated a lot of discussions. Thank you, Madhavan, for excellent moderation, and we all enjoyed the session very well. And thank you, IML, for a very interesting quiz program. It was very informative. And thank you, Dr. Pitambran, for making all the arrangements for the Zoom platform. So thank you all the participants. Good night. Take care. See you all soon next month. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.